Here at Third Sector, we want to celebrate the people and the not-for-profit organisations who change lives for the better, which is why the Third Sector Awards are back for 2025. The Third Sector Awards are the biggest awards celebration in the charity sector, and we're here to shine a spotlight on the outstanding work you and your teams do. Whether you're tackling inequality, empowering communities, or transforming lives for the better, we want to celebrate you. And the deadline to submit your entry for the Third Sector Awards has just been extended, so you have until 1 minute before midnight on Thursday, the 5th of June, to submit your entries. Find out more about the awards, explore the categories, and start your entry now at thirdsectorawards.com.
Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Emily Harle.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be marking Volunteers Week by exploring some of the digital solutions to common challenges faced by charities when it comes to managing their volunteers. This year is the 41st edition of Volunteers Week. It's taking place from the 2nd to the 8th of June and is an opportunity to recognise and celebrate the valuable contributions that volunteers make in the charity sector.
We have two guests joining us for this discussion today. First up is Saskia Konynenburg, Executive Director of Voice and Impact at the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, or NCVO. Hello, Saskia.
Hello.
And also with us is Gethyn Williams, a volunteering specialist and strategist who has recently developed a toolkit to help charities make the most of digital opportunities in managing their volunteering workloads. Hello, Gethyn.
Hi, everyone.
Now, as this episode is released on the eve of Volunteers Week 2025, it seems like a good time to reflect on the general state of volunteering in the United Kingdom. And at face value, it's not the prettiest of pictures. The government's 2024 Community Life Survey found that 16% of adults took part in formal volunteering once a month in 2023 to 24. That's down from 27% a decade ago, meaning the percentage of adults who had volunteered at least once a month in 2013-14 is just about equivalent to the proportion who volunteered once in the past year. Saskia, what do you make of that finding? Is the world of volunteering looking as gloomy as it might suggest from where you're sitting at NCVO?
It's very much a often asked support cry for help that we hear from charities, that they're struggling to recruit and indeed retain volunteers. So you might do a sort of marketing campaign and you might get lots of initial enthusiasm, but it's how you can retain those volunteers and help fill your appointment slots for volunteering. That seems to be really difficult. And I think the crunch point really was the pandemic. So people wanted to volunteer in new ways. So they moved away from formal volunteering. Lots of people never returned to fill those volunteer appointments. So that was a really big problem. And so we're seeing that charities really need to evolve the way they offer volunteering. And for some of them who their services are already stretched, that's a real challenge in keeping up with what people want to do now.
And what effect is that having on charities' ability to function?
Well, many charities are already struggling to function due to lack of funding, increased demand, the absolute dire situations that we have in communities due to services already being stripped back. So charities need volunteers more than ever, but volunteer recruitment and management is a really hefty task. I don't think people realise how difficult that can be. It really needs focus, it needs the resources, and it needs us to think in new and innovative ways to try and recruit that future volunteer cohort. So charities are already struggling. They need volunteers. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation. How do you move away from the challenges of day-to-day running your services to give enough time to go, right, we need to really change how we manage our volunteers. We need a complete 360 on our volunteer strategy at a time when we are struggling to work out whether we can afford to pay this month's bills. If we're a food bank, if we've got enough food, it's a really difficult situation, which I'm sure all the listeners will be aware of in the charity sector at the moment.
And Gethyn, in your view, what are some of the digital solutions to these challenges that Saskia has just outlined, particularly with that shift away from formal volunteering appointments? How can charities begin to combat that?
Well, there's no doubt that Saskia is right. Volunteering is under real pressure at the moment, and we are seeing pretty low rates by historic standards. But digital can play a role, I think, in combating some of those challenges and helping volunteer involving organisations to change the way they offer volunteering to try and keep up with the changes in motivations and expectations that we've seen over some time now from volunteers. And I would agree, COVID sort of accelerated that trend. The three areas where digital can really help, and I don't think this is exclusive to volunteering, but if we look where digital is applied in other areas of work and business and life and society, you're thinking about three things typically. You're thinking about scale. Can I use digital to help me grow my volunteering operation, which is all about, I guess, a bigger pipeline of people that might be interested in volunteering with you? How can I increase reach that way? So digital can really help for scale. It can also help for efficiency. So for us as volunteer involving organisations, for volunteer managers, people that host volunteers, is there something digital can do to help us improve our processes, perhaps cut out some unnecessary steps, make the whole thing a little bit more streamlined and easier and free up our time for some of the more relational elements of the role, as Saskia described? So we can have scale, we can have efficiency. And the third one, which is probably the most important for the era that we're in, is the experience for the volunteer. Can we use digital to improve the volunteer's journey? Can we make it smoother, a bit less friction in it? Can we help people get into volunteering quicker? For volunteer managers, I'd encourage them to think about scale, efficiency, and experience as three ways in which digital can maybe enhance their program when it's under such strain and pressure right now.
And if we could go into a little more detail in each of those areas, starting with scale. When you're talking about the reach, do you mean in terms of recruiting new volunteers, or is there something to say for scale when charities have already got their cohort of volunteers?
I guess it could be a little bit of both, but mainly we'll be thinking about recruitment here. And I do think Saskia is right. The charities that are experiencing the most sort of stability and sustainability with their programs at the moment tend to be the ones that focus on both recruitment and retention. It's not that just one of those is going to solve your problem. If you put an awful lot of effort into kind of growing your potential reach of volunteers, but you're not thinking about how you retain them, then you're going to have another version of this challenge too. But mainly, yes, it's about how can we get our offer out there. And we hear a lot through surveys time and time again how difficult it can be for potential volunteers to find you or to find an opportunity that's right for you. We all use different platforms. We all advertise in different places. It's not great for the volunteer always. So there are digital ways, without getting too technical, that this picture is starting to improve, or there is potential to join up systems a little bit better. But certainly, yes, recruitment for scale is probably the obvious one to think about. How can we improve our chances of reaching more people that might potentially want to volunteer with us?
And could you give us a specific example of a way that a charity is employing digital to make sure that they're on top of their scale?
If you're trying to reach a bigger type of audience, then we might think about the kind of journey that someone like the British Heart Foundation has been on in recent years. So they've had quite a lot of success, as I understand, in diversifying and growing their pool of volunteers. They've got a lot younger volunteers in their cohort now. There's a lot more diversity in there. And the main tactic they've employed for that, as far as I understand anyway, isn't necessarily about looking for a bigger reach necessarily, but they've really diversified their offer. So they've broken down charity retail volunteering into less of the model that we would have seen 10 or 20 years ago, a regular shift every week at the same time, same people, a small cohort of people doing the majority of the work. And they've broken that role down into tasks or shift-based activities. So they're attracting a bigger pool of people overall, but perhaps those individuals are doing fewer individual shifts, but they've got a lot more control over what they take on and what they pick up and put down around their lives. And this is a general tactic, I think, that people are using digital for to cope with these changes in volunteering, breaking roles down into more task-based, shift-based stuff that people can pick up and put down, and using digital to help people self-select the shifts that they can do. And that in itself can be a version of scale. It can open up you to a much greater audience. And it does seem to have worked for BHF.
And what about in terms of efficiency? Has there been any charities really using digital to maximise the efficiency of their volunteering mechanisms?
I suppose it is about some of the tools that you can adopt, and there are great tools out there, and most volunteer management systems probably have quite a lot of functionality that maybe you don't even see day to day as a busy volunteer manager. So it's always worth exploring what your system can and can't do. But a lot of the time, I think the challenge with digital is around developing a mindset that enables you to figure out what you need and take on what you can't. So over the last 10 years or so, we've seen a lot of marketing and communications approaches from other sectors being imported into volunteering. And one of those really helps here. And it's this idea of mapping the user journey. What are all of your touch points that you have with volunteers? How do they hear about you in the first place? What's the first bit of contact you have with them? What do they do online? What do you need a human to do with them? Doing a sort of digital user journey mapping exercise where you figure out what your journey looks like with them, and then identifying the points in that process in which digital can make a real difference, because it's not a silver bullet for everything. And we still want some human interaction in volunteering, right? So using that kind of approach can really help you figure out which bits of digital are best to adopt. When I would talk to and work with volunteer managers, I find it's probably as much about the mindset for digital as it is about the latest shiny thing that people are using or adopting.
And the one underpinning all of this was experience, volunteer experience. Saskia, I wanted to come to you on that. What are the key things that volunteers are looking for from their experience at the moment in light of people moving away from formal volunteering? I mean, what are the things that digital can really do to support the optimal volunteer experience in today's age?
I don't want to sound like an old lady, but I think there is very much a generational difference that we need to stay up to date with. We definitely know that younger people increasingly want to be a more digital approach. They want things to be more flexible. There's very much a pull towards cause, but there's also a pull towards values and alignment to that. So for example, how you might use digitally in that sense would be that if you were going to do storytelling, you might use that through TikTok or other social media to really express the values of your charity, which will pull in those younger people who are looking for that kind of values alignment to their own, and they're motivated by that. Whereas we see the more traditional volunteering, people volunteer for causes that they know, causes that are close to them, causes they might respect. One thing that's interesting, and it struck me as Gethyn was talking then, was we found with our time well spent research that some people said they hadn't volunteered because they'd never been asked. Now, that's a really big key piece of information. Are we as a charity sector asking people enough to volunteer? And are we asking in the right ways? So digital marketing can play a huge part in that, especially if we are looking to diversify or target younger people. We would always recommend that you have all your volunteer personas mapped out, potentially for if you were looking at different roles like Gethyn was describing in that kind of retail charity shop way. Are there different people that you could target through that? So I think with volunteer experience, people want different things. There's definitely a generational divide. So younger people are looking for more informal volunteering. They don't really want to sign up to things long term. You know, they may have lots of different things that they want to do, and volunteering is just a part of that. Whereas for potentially older people or people who have volunteered for a very long time, that's become quite a habit. The habit of volunteering is something that's really hard to fall into and quite easy to fall out of. So there's a whole piece of work around volunteer management, making sure that you understand what different volunteers want, potentially developing volunteer personas. So if you have got specific roles that do need classically filling on a week-to-week basis, then what's the sort of person that would do that? And then targeting your recruitment around that. If you have more flexible volunteering, then what does that look like? How can you storytell through your marketing and your communications these different volunteer experiences so that it's not absolutely stuck and rigid each time, so it only appeals to one group of people? So having that flexibility, which is really, again, a real challenge for volunteer managers and charities to offer all these different things, as well as also considering that there's additional needs. If you go too far into digital, you may be putting in barriers for other volunteers that aren't digitally literate. So the volunteering landscape has opened up into a huge kind of bag of pick a mix, and you have to try and work out exactly what it is that will be appealing.
Which presumably means a lot more work for the people who are trying to manage and coordinate those volunteers and make sure that the positions that need to be filled in order for the charity to function as effectively as possible are. I think the most obvious change in the volunteering landscape came with COVID and the forced shift to virtual volunteering wherever possible. I was interested to read in your Time Well Spent report, which came out coming up to a couple of years ago now, that virtual volunteering was found to be the third most common place to volunteer. For the uninitiated, could you just tell us very briefly what virtual volunteering is and perhaps share an example of a charity that's doing that really well?
We've seen a massive growth in virtual volunteering. I think when COVID happened, a lot of people obviously were at home. So they wanted to use their time in the best possible way, but we often weren't allowed out and allowed to interact. So they looked for new opportunities. And there was a huge uplift in things like befriending online and having peer support groups. An example is myself. I went to a Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide group, SOBS, for siblings. And that was an online peer support session, so run by other survivors of bereavement through suicide. So that's a really brilliant volunteer network. And that's an organisation that has really adapted to that online world really well. And actually for a participant like myself, I much prefer to go to that online. It's actually quite daunting to go to some of these groups. So online can be so much better, both for the volunteer and for the people that we're trying to support. Another example of volunteering online would be perhaps if you're a trustee. So I'm a trustee for Charity Comms. All our board meetings are online. That's not always the case for all trustee roles, but often if you're looking for trustee roles, it will say whether they are remote or in person. That's just two examples of how volunteering can be opened up. Peer support, befriending, trusteeships. And I know this through NCVO, where we are very much a hybrid organisation. We used to be very London-based, as I'm sure a lot of listeners will know. We're based out of society building, but actually now we're a hybrid organisation. We've really managed to open up our talent pool through the workforce, and that absolutely applies to volunteering, particularly if you have niche roles or specialist roles. You might need help with, I don't know, accountancy or some law advice. Making those online really does open up the doors to more people.
And thank you for bringing up that diversification of the volunteer pool, because that is a really important part of this discussion, and particularly when we're thinking about accessibility of volunteering. It's really important to make sure people can access it as they need to and make sure that their needs are able to be met through whatever volunteering it is they are looking to take on. And Gethyn, can you tell me a bit about the technical requirements that are needed to enable virtual volunteering within charities?
Yeah, some of the technical requirements probably aren't as advanced as you might think. For some of those shift-based models that we were talking about earlier, we are thinking about, I suppose, technology that can offer that way of setting up volunteering, and that presents a picture that volunteer managers have to manage then in terms of managing those shifts. But beyond that, you might not need much more than a regular internet connection. Saskia's right to pick up on the growth in online volunteering, probably accelerated by the pandemic and the normalization of working online. The kind of accompanying story to this in volunteering is the enormous rise that we've seen in skills-based volunteering, professionals using their professional skills to do good, driven by lots of quite interesting motivations that probably are a little bit different to the ones that we might typically think of in volunteering. Wanting to use professional skills, deriving some sort of status in their volunteering from that, but it really opens up all sorts of possibilities for you. They could be anywhere in the country. They might not even necessarily need to be really aligned with your cause. What they're looking to do is bring their professional skill set to something good and worthwhile. They may be looking for a really good impact story that they can tell, so that the charities that do this really well tend to frame those opportunities as kind of a project, something time limited, not necessarily an ongoing commitment. We really need your expertise to help us get from A to B, and then you can kind of move on if you want. And a lot of this can be done purely online. What you might want to think about if you're taking on online volunteers is how you get to do some of that due diligence that you might want to do with a volunteer, particularly if they're doing something quite advanced with you, where you might need to share some sensitive information. So you don't quite get the same opportunities for face-to-face interaction and to sort of vet them in that sense. But there are certainly ways of doing that, and you might not need much of a technological setup to do it.
And conversely as well, we talked briefly about retention earlier, and if you don't actually have any physical FaceTime with your volunteers, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to demonstrate to them the value of the work that they're doing, that the charity is doing overall. Saskia, I wonder, do you have any thoughts on ways in which charities are or could potentially be ensuring that they are well engaged with their volunteers to motivate them, to keep them on board once they've gone through the difficult job of recruiting them in the first place when they're not necessarily there physically in situ?
I think the best way to ensure that you're providing a rich volunteer experience is asking your volunteers, regularly catching up with them. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. If you are taking a hybrid approach, or, your volunteer happens to be based in Inverness and your charity is in Bristol, then that's fine, but it doesn't mean that you can't communicate regularly. And I think also listening when people do decide to resign or give up volunteering for your organisation, exactly as the same you would with a workforce. You do kind of an exit interview. We should be surveying volunteers that are leaving and asking, what is it that made you leave? Like, is there anything we could have done to make you stay? How could we improve this for future volunteers? All those insights are really, really important for building your kind of volunteer management programme.
Gethyn, do you have any thoughts on specifically digital solutions that might be able to help that volunteer retention when volunteers are not physically in the room with the charity?
Well, what's fascinating for me from the time well spent research about virtual volunteering was the finding that it can be just as satisfying as face-to-face interaction. You'd expect there to be some drop-off, or it might not be quite as rewarding, but actually volunteers that do this do say that they can get a lot out of it. So if you're a charity thinking about this, don't be put off by that barrier or that potential barrier. I would say that most volunteer management software systems or platforms do have quite a lot of sophisticated comms tools that you can use. And I guess the principle here is that we should really be talking to our volunteers all year round, not just when we need things from them. And it is a relationship that you nurture and grow, just like you would do in a marketing environment or anything like that. So I would say explore the tools that your VMS, your volunteer management software, already has. There may be ways that you can automate messages to make life really easy for you. You can tell volunteer things without necessarily expecting a conversation. Volunteers often appreciate that. It's a form of acknowledgement. Really good charities, I think, often tell their volunteers about things that are coming up for them before they go public. Even if you don't have much budget, you can use that kind of principle of exclusivity to make your volunteers feel special and rewarded, and lots of comms tools can help you do that. But equally, volunteers love the interaction with their peers, with other volunteers as well. So lots of comms tools have opportunities for kind of peer engagement or forums where they can talk to each other. Often volunteers know best how volunteering works, and they can support each other really, really, really well. So it's not just about everything that we feel we have to do to create and manage the conversation. We can also set things up so that volunteers get the benefit of social interaction and talk to each other through the tools that maybe we've already got at our disposal.
And while we're talking about innovative new tools, it would be remiss to have this conversation without bringing AI into the fold. So what is the future likely to hold for the role of AI in volunteering, in volunteer management? Gethyn, can you speak to that?
Okay, big question. In some senses, I don't think it's dissimilar to any other form of life in which AI is encroaching. So, a lot of us are using AI for sort of personal productivity reasons, and I don't think volunteer managers are any different. You're already hearing about people using AI to rewrite role descriptions or task descriptions or craft really great adverts for their volunteer roles. Or actually, one thing I've seen a lot of, which is very helpful, is summarizing a lot of data that you might have in your volunteer survey, especially if you're asking lots of free text questions where it can be a bit of a nightmare to go through all of that and to bring it all out. AI can really churn that out for you in a really digestible way. And actually, we see this all over the place, don't we? Anywhere where their big data is involved, AI feels like it has a big role to play. I have seen examples of early projects where AI is being used to give volunteers additional tools to do their roles really well. There's a project in Singapore I just read about in healthcare where AI tools are being used to help volunteers target the individuals that could benefit from their service, to help them reach them in a really efficient way or prioritize who they reach out to. So there are ways of making the volunteering role more effective, I suppose, and we might see AI being used to help volunteering there. The area that I'm really excited about, though, takes us back to that challenge about how they find you online and what a difficulty it can be. I wouldn't have thought it's too long before we see something more like personalized chatbots that can really help you kind of curate your entry into volunteering online for you. Someone that can really personalize your search results in a way that you just don't get through a regular search engine, and help you stand a much better chance of getting to the volunteer role that's right for you. That doesn't feel like it's too far off to me.
That all sounds very promising and exciting. And Saskia, what support is NCVO offering for charities who want to be learning more about how they can use digital and specifically AI?
We ourselves are actually on a big transformation journey. We are working towards, inside of NCVO, how we can be more digitally eloquent. We are reviewing our tech, and we're also going to be looking at how we can use AI. And what I think is really special about NCVO's role in the sector is that we can actually share that journey and that learning. We stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder with charities, and we want to share our journey as we go through it and share our learnings. We do get approached by quite a lot of charities asking for specific kind of practical support. So we have developed lots of practical support on AI. Also, with my Charity Comms trustee hat on, that's another really good organisation that are helping people adopt AI and look at how to use it. One thing I would say, though, around AI and specifically in volunteering is that people, when they are looking for a volunteering role, really want to do something impactful. And I think AI is brilliant. I would almost say volunteering is the antidote to that, because volunteering is about human contact, human interaction, human giving, really feeling that sense of purpose and giving something wholesome and decent back to society. So it's brilliant. If you can get AI to do the efficiency and the speeding up of your volunteer management, or if you're a small charity and you've really struggled with admin and you've been trying to get a volunteer to come in and support with admin, but it's a bit iffy because you should probably pay them, perhaps there's an AI solution there, and you can recruit a volunteer to help you do the really great human interaction that AI will never replace.
Thank you. And Gethyn, what would your top tips be for a charity wanting to make greater use of digital in their volunteer management systems? I know we've covered quite a bit of ground over the past 20 minutes or so, but what would your desired number one takeaway be?
Over the last year, I've put together a toolkit called Digital in Volunteering with colleagues at Team Kinetic and the Association of Volunteer Managers, looking at just these kind of questions. What we found, I suppose, is it's as much about the mindset as it is about the tools. There's a lot of new stuff that comes along in digital, and it can be very shiny and attractive, and you might feel like you're missing out if you don't adopt the latest thing. What we're hearing from volunteer managers is that it's good, though, to take a step back, think about what you really need from digital, think about where it can enhance your volunteering program, and come to it with a little bit more confidence and judiciousness, I suppose. So I guess I would encourage people, I suppose I would say this, I would encourage people to go online, search for the Digital in Volunteering Toolkit. You can download it now through the AVM website and take a look at some of the resources there. There are lots of simple exercises that you can do to help get yourself in the right headspace for making the most of digital on your terms.
So Gethyn has a product that he would like you to make use of. It sounds very worthwhile, and we will include a link to that in the show notes to this episode. Saskia, what would your top tip be for a charity thinking, I really wish I could make greater use of digital, but I'm not entirely sure where to start?
I would say look at NCVO resources, look at Charity Comms resources, but also don't have an over-reliance on digital. I would say really focus initially on perhaps hybrid options, seeing what you can do to help, make things easier, but don't think you suddenly have to have it absolutely top-notch and everything singing and dancing. Because as we move a lot of volunteer management and retention, recruitment, etc. online, we need to also understand that there are still a whole huge amount of people who won't want to volunteer in that way and will find that a bit baffling and a bit too much as well. So if you are moving things into volunteering digitally, really think about how you can support your volunteers with digital confidence as well. So things around privacy, data protection, identifying scams, all of those things. It should never just be us broadcasting saying this is what we do. We need to also think about the volunteers using it on the other side.
Some really thought-provoking points there. Saskia and Gethyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Saskia and Gethyn, and that's it for this episode. Next week, we'll be hearing how volunteering is thriving for one portion of the sector and finding out how charities that are feeling less optimistic about their volunteer pool can learn from them. Do join us for that. But for now, from Emily and me and everyone at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Jude Owen.